The Bank of England today left its asset purchase target at £375 billion. But with all eyes on the US at the moment, how do the two central banks and their relative economies match up? Peter Dixon of Commerzbank joins me on the phone now. Peter, in your view, how does the BOE asset purchase policy line up with its US counterpart?
Well, I think there are two ways to look at this. One is the stock approach and one is the flow approach. If you look at the flow approach, then obviously the Bank of England hasn't been buying assets since November of last year. And in that sense, you might think that the policy is somewhat tighter than that which is currently being engaged in by the Federal Reserve. But if you actually look at the stock of assets, the Bank of England's balance sheet is around about 24% of GDP, and that compares to about 22%, I think, for the United States. So consequently, you would say that in terms of what has already been done by the Bank of England, it has been more aggressive in terms of quantitative easing than the Fed. And I think what we've seen over the course of recent months is the Fed catching up with the UK central bank.
While we know that there is no real communication between central banks on policy, will the BOE be seeking to balance out current US volatility on some level, do you think?
Well, I think not, because the general view appears to be that the UK economy is recovering quite nicely at the moment, and unless it gets derailed by some exogenous factors, then there's no real reason for the Bank of England to step in. And certainly in terms of the driving forces behind the UK story at the moment, it really is all about what's happening at home. So unless we see some serious volatility coming from perhaps the equity markets or something like that, then I don't think there's any need for the Bank of England to react to what is at the moment more of a potential threat than an actual one.
With Janet Yellen confirmed as taking the US Federal Reserve hot seat, markets are now hinged on when tapering will begin. What timeframe is Commerzbank working to on this matter?
Well, we're looking for tapering to begin on schedule in December. So basically, Ben Bernanke will still be in place at that point. He, as it were, presses the button, the tapering process begins, and he hands over the baton to Mrs. Yellen sometime in the course of 2014. So this process will hopefully begin, unless economic circumstances conspire against it, sometime in the course of this year, and we continue to look for it to be completed by the middle of 2014.
Equity and currency markets remain edgy as the US government shutdown continues. Typically, US investors flock to US treasuries when there is uncertainty in the stock market. Are we seeing similar trends here, and what could the ripple effect be for the UK market and British pound?
Well, we're certainly not seeing investors flocking into the United States, which makes a lot of sense because obviously it's the US market, the Treasury market in particular, which remains at risk in the event of some form of default. What we're seeing at the moment is some modest upward move in Treasury yields vis-a-vis those in the UK. But I think if there were to be some form of ripple effect, it's likely that this will spill over to affect all markets simultaneously because, after all, the US still acts as a benchmark for the whole of the global financial system. So problems in the US will spill over to affect the UK and other European bond markets in particular. But so far, there are a few signs of this happening. And I think the best strategy for most investors is simply to hold cash rather than to invest in markets where there's a risk of things going wrong in the course of the next few days.
Lastly then, with everything that we've discussed in mind, could political failings in the US put Q4 recovery at risk for both the US and the UK?
Well, I think it's likely that if we see any form of activity downturn, it will be in the US first because it's generally, I think, accepted that something like every week shutdown in the US will cost 0.2 percentage points of US growth. So it's entirely possible that we'll see some modest impact upon US growth over the course of Q4. That's unlikely to impact upon the UK unless that downturn really is more severe and it drags on into the first quarter of 2014. And under those circumstances, you might expect to see much greater international implications. But I think for the moment, and assuming some form of deal is completed in the US by mid-October, I think most of us are expecting that this will be an event which is confined purely to the United States.
Peter, thanks very much for your comments. That's all we've got time for right now, but the Dukascopy TV team will be bringing you all the latest updates and analysis, so don't go away.